Hi, church family. I'm coming to you from the Dominican Republic, and I wanted to take a moment and share a video with you to talk about this topic of hell. One of the reasons that this topic has a lot of confusion within the church is because the main translation that we have used for the last 400 years as English-speaking people is the King James translation. And the King James translation took 3 Greek words, and they translated all 3 of these Greek words as hell. Our modern translations have done a better job of using different words for each Greek word, but for 400 years, every time we come across one of these Greek words, we in our English Bibles just read the word hell. And so I want to take a moment and simply share with you each one of these Greek words and do a little explanation of how the people back during the Bible days would have understood these words. So we have Gehenna, we have Hades, and we have Tartarus. And then at the very end of this video, I'll talk about the lake of fire. So first of all, let's talk about Gehenna. Gehenna is a word that only 2 people in the New Testament use, Jesus and his stepbrother, James. And Jesus uses it quite often. If you remember the hyperbolic speech that Jesus gave where he said, if you men are struggling with lust, it'd be better for you to pluck your eyeball out than for your entire body to be thrown into Gehenna. Well, this Greek word Gehenna in Hebrew was Ben Hinnom, and it actually referred to a valley. We find this valley in the book of Jeremiah, where the Israelites, the people of God, have been sacrificing their babies to the god Molech. And God steps in through the prophet Jeremiah and says, this is outrageous, this is enough, God has had enough, and you will pay for this egregious atrocity, murdering babies. And God said the way that you're going to pay for it is that Israel will be destroyed. And of course, we know this happened in 70 AD when God allowed the Roman Empire to come into Jerusalem, burn the temple to the ground, and destroy Jerusalem. And so Jesus is in the middle of these 2 events, from the book of Jeremiah to 70 AD when the temple is destroyed. And Jesus is using this word Gehenna, and his followers knew exactly where that was. And sure enough, God allows the Israelites in Jerusalem to be destroyed, and those who are saved are those who are followers of Jesus, and they escape into the mountains. And Jesus talks about this in his famous Olivet Discourse, and those who belong to Jesus escape this tribulation in 70 AD. So that's the word Gehenna. We'll take some time to unpack this a little more on a podcast later. Now let's talk about this word Hades. In our modern translations, they've done a really good job of translating this word just as Hades. The Greek word is Hades. In our English Bibles, it says Hades. But in the King James translation, the Greek word Hades was translated as hell. And I wasn't around 400 years ago to ask them why they did that, but Hades is the Greek equivalent to the Hebrew word Sheol. And we find this word Sheol, once again, all throughout our English Bibles. And yes, in the King James translation, it is not Sheol, it is hell. But Sheol was only referring to the grave, the place of the dead. And in ancient mythology, there was an actual underworld, and it was controlled by the god Baal, or in Hebrew, Baal. But we'll talk about that later in a podcast. Here's the simple point I want to make. The Greek word Hades is only referring to the grave. And so the author John, when he writes the book of Revelation, and he says that Jesus holds the keys to death and Hades, that means Jesus is going to unlock the underworld, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against Jesus and his church, and all of those who have died will rise again through Jesus. So we have this word Gehenna, we have this word Hades, and then I'm just going to take 1 second and talk about this word Tartarus. Peter is writing in his second letter, 2 Peter, and he references Tartarus. Once again, in all of our English translation, this is translated hell, but actually what Peter is doing is he's referencing a Greek myth that all of his audience would have understood, and this was the place where the Titans in Greek mythology were held, and so they're being held, and Peter comes in and he uses this common Greek myth to talk about what God is doing to the angels. And really, the whole passage is warning the church, you're not exempt from God's judgment. Just like those in Jeremiah's day, just like those in Jesus' day, and now those after Jesus in Peter's day, you're not exempt from God's judgment. Just like Noah, and so Peter goes on and talks about Noah and Tartarus and so on and so forth. Certainly, we don't believe that Peter believed in Greek mythology. He's taking something that his audience believes in and he's repurposing it, much like Paul did in Athens. Okay, so those are the three Greek words. Gehenna, then we have Hades, and then we have Tartarus. And then let me take one more minute and talk about the lake of fire. Now, we find the lake of fire in the book of Revelation. Ironically, what's thrown into the lake of fire is death and Hades. It's sometimes translated death and hell. So we have death and hell being thrown into the lake of fire. I think it's best, though, if we understand the lake of fire through the lens of Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this vision, and he sees the Ancient of Days on the throne in heaven, and there's a river, keyword, river of fire flowing from his mouth. Now, where do all rivers flow into? They flow into lakes. So I think it's best for us to understand the lake of fire in the book of Revelation as the finality of God's judgment. This is where all death is eliminated, all evil is eliminated, and there will be no more night. There will be no more sickness. There will be no more pain. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and we will live forever with Jesus. All right, I hope that was helpful. Once again, we'll unpack some more of this when we get our podcast up started, but I wanted to just come after Pastor Matt's sermon and give us a brief overview of these Greek words. Have a great day.